Allison Markovitz. I'm the Chief Strategic Partnerships Officer at Fermilab and also a member of the board of the Chicago Council of Science and Technology. Today's program is presented by the Chicago Council on Science and Technology, Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, and the Chicago Public Library. Thank you to the Chicago Public Library for hosting tonight. C2ST is pleased to continue its collaboration with the library and hopes to do so for the foreseeable future. For those of you who are new to C2ST, it is an 11-year-old not-for-profit organization that seeks to enhance the public's appreciation of science and technology and their impact on society. C2ST hosts about 30 free or low-cost programs throughout the year on any and all science and technology topics. You can visit c2st.org or refer to postcards on the sign-in table for C2ST's upcoming programs. You can also sign up for their email list. To learn more about Fermilab, its science, and opportunities to visit, you can visit our website at fnal.gov or subscribe to our social media channels at Fermilab. There are bookmarks with this information at the sign-in table. For this event, please turn down your cell phones, but we encourage you to take pictures and post and tweet throughout the event. Later in the event, there will be a Q&A session with scientists. Please respect those with hearing disabilities and wait for the microphone if you have a question. Thank you very much for coming to this event. And now, to get the program started, I'd like to introduce the director of Fermilab, Nigel Lockyer.
Good evening, folks. Welcome. Thanks for coming. We're here to, I think we're here to honor Leon. I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but Leon is a giant in our field in particle physics. He was the second director of Fermilab after Bob Wilson. He was a great scientist. He was an educator. And he was an all-around approachable person. Anybody that knew Leon would know that you could go into his office at any time and have a discussion with him. So I'm just going to say a few words about the impact that he's had, not so much historically, but on the field today, on where is particle physics today. How has Leon put his fingerprints on that? And I think you can see it everywhere. So he's had that huge impact on our field. He's had a huge impact on science and education in general, and he had a huge impact on myself since I was one of the younger people at that time. So what I appreciated about him was that he had an open door policy. You could go in late in the afternoon and have a discussion with him, which I used to do because I had some proposals that I was submitting to the laboratory, and obviously the laboratory director has a say in what happens. So I thought I needed to convince Leon of what I was doing. And I remember going into his office and feeling pretty unhappy because my proposal was not moving along well enough. And I said, you know, Leon, you just don't like B physics. And he said to me, how can you say that, Nigel? I discovered the B quark. All right, I said, good point. So he had a number of classic comments. He had a way with words. The one that I like is he says, you know, physics is not religion. If it was, it'd be a lot easier to raise money. So I sympathize with that as a lab director. He would enjoy the physics slam you're going to see tonight with the IMSA students. You know, Fermilab's future, you've probably heard, is about neutrino physics, understanding the neutrino. Well, you know, Leon discovered the neutrino, so it's pretty clear that he's a person whose fingerprints are on the laboratory today and will be for the next several decades. I remember another time in his office where he was working with the super collider in Texas, And there was a certain sense that maybe something should have been at Fermilab. And I was talking to him about it, and he says, you know, Nigel, a good director, now he had no idea I was going to be the director in the future. In fact, he might roll over in his grave if he knew I was the director. But he says, if you're going to be a good director, you've got to have a proposal in your bottom drawer. And he reaches down and he pulls out the drawer. And I look down at it, and I see this orange book with a ring on it, and I'm thinking, wow, this is like the secret proposal. So I said, Leon, what's that? And he says, it's the bottom drawer. So that was typical Leon. So he discovered the bottom quark. He discovered the neutrino. He invented the idea of a beam dump experiment, where you just take a beam and you just put it into an absorber and you see what comes out the other side. That's how he discovered the neutrino. But that's the technique that's used today at Fermilab and other labs around the world to look for dark matter. So it's a technique that's lived on. I think Leon gets credit, as you'll hear from Rocky and Michael later, of merging particle physics with cosmology, the small with the large. It really was not an obvious thing at the time, but he was certainly one of the people who contributed to that thinking. He's known for Saturday morning physics, which continues at Fermilab. It's had an impact on many, many lives over the decades, and we continue that and feel very proud that we're able to host so many young people from around the area and in the city. There's the Lederman Science Center. There's IMSA. So, you know, many things. So the last, I'll say my favorite Leon kind of situation was we had gone to Texas, and the Super Collider, there was a small town in Texas which had this complicated name. It was Wax or something. And we were in a restaurant, and Leon is saying to the hostess, so how do you say the name of this place? It's Wax, or is it Hatchie, or how do you guys say it? And she says, Burger King. So that's a Leon joke for you. So I'll just say thank you, Leon, for everything you've done for us, and we're living your dream. So enjoy your evening.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Joe Licken. I'm the Deputy Director for Research at Fermilab. I think, as you've already discovered from Nigel's remarks, this event is supposed to be fun. If you're doing an event honoring Leon and you're not having fun, then you're not doing it right. So we're going to try and make everything that you see here informal and fun and in his spirit as much as we can. So I do have a few slides, and we probably have a way to display them even. Wow, look at that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Fermilab's past and future, and that's because both the past and the future of Fermilab are all linked in very important, inextricable ways to Leon. And one way of expressing that is to look at the score chart for particle physics. So these are all of the known elementary particles. I'm not counting dark matter here because we don't know what it is, but I'll get back to that in a minute. And here's the color coding. If it's red, it means Leon discovered it, so the muon neutrino and the bottom quark. If it's blue, it means it was discovered at Fermilab, or maybe it wasn't quite discovered at Fermilab, but we claim half the credit, and that's the Higgs boson. So I put that one on there. If you don't believe me, I can tell you afterwards why you. So first of all, that's Leon's scorecard all by itself is pretty good. But the other point I want to make here is that the Fermilab discoveries also would not have happened without Leon. In particular, the discovery of the top quark and the tau neutrino was done with the Tevatron accelerator, which was constructed while Leon was the director of Fermilab. So none of this is there without Leon. Okay, so let me go back to the muon neutrino. If you look at the Nobel Prize citation, that was given to Leon with his collaborators Mel Schwartz and Jack Steinberger, it actually mentions two things. Usually they give you a Nobel Prize for one thing, but they actually did two things, I think either of which was worthy of a Nobel Prize. The first was they were the first people to figure out how to make a beam of neutrinos, which sounds pretty hard when you think about it. This was in 1962. They figured out how to make a beam of neutrinos. If you think about what else was going on in the world then, like, John Glenn is orbiting the Earth. What's more impressive, John Glenn orbiting the Earth or these guys making a beam of neutrinos? You can think about that. How do you actually do that? Well, you need a particle accelerator. You don't actually accelerate neutrinos, but you accelerate protons. And then the trick is, how do you convert a high-energy beam of protons into a high-energy beam of neutrinos? So I don't actually know how that works because I'm a theorist. But Don Lincoln is here, fortunately, and he has a video on YouTube that explains exactly how this works, so you can ask him. This is Leon many years later trying to explain it himself, but his hand is actually covering the vital part here. The thing that you need to know is that they discovered what we now call the second kind of neutrino, the muon neutrino, and it's called that because it's actually, in the way they make the neutrino beam, it's produced with another particle, a charged particle called the muon. And the fact that there were two kinds of neutrinos, people have been making two kinds of neutrinos for a long time, but what they actually proved is that they were two different kinds of neutrinos, and that was already a mystery. Why should there be a muon neutrino and then an electron neutrino, different elementary particles? So here's the quote from Leon. This is from the Nobel, I think it's from the Nobel banquet. He said, "The most encouraging aspect of the Nobel Prize is that hopefully young people, I hope there's some young people in this audience, will hear about this and be inspired to carry on this most basic kind of research. These are the people who will figure out how to use these tools to solve problems society faces." This is a theme we'll come back to again and again. Leon thinking about broader impacts of the science that we're doing. Neutrinos are part of the fund of basic knowledge we need to help us cope with and improve our future. So this would have been 1988. It's also quite a visionary statement. So what are we doing today? We're still making beams of neutrinos. Much better beams of neutrinos, but it's the same basic idea that Leon and his collaborators invented. If you go to Fermilab right now, you will see that we're making two kinds of beams of neutrinos. One, what we call the booster neutrino beam. It's for neutrino experiments on the Fermilab site. And another beam of neutrinos called the neutrino beam that we're actually shooting from Fermilab to northern Minnesota, 500 miles away, where there's a detector called NOVA doing another neutrino experiment. And we are about to start construction of yet another neutrino beam, which will be the world's best, most powerful neutrino beam, which is going to point towards South Dakota, as I'll describe in a moment. So we're all about neutrino beams. So why do we still care about neutrinos? It's been a long time since 1962. Well, neutrinos are very weird, and they're both weird particles and they're very important particles. There's actually more neutrinos in the universe than there is of all the stuff that you're made out of. So they're very fundamental to our universe, and they're also very weird. And this is one way of saying that. Neutrinos are nature's version of Schrodinger's cat. So I'm sure all of you have heard the quantum problem of Schrodinger's cat, which is simultaneously alive and dead until you peek in the box and measure it. This is the kind of thing that can only happen in a quantum world. Well, nobody's actually made Schrodinger's cat yet, but neutrinos do this. So at Fermilab, when we make a beam of neutrinos, we're actually producing the muon neutrino that Leon and his collaborators discovered. So we know what they are. They're muon neutrinos. And when they leave Fermilab, that's what they are. We actually have a detector at Fermilab just to check, make sure we're making muon neutrinos. When they arrive in Minnesota, 500 miles away, after going through the Earth, they don't actually interact hardly at all with the Earth. So really nothing is happening except that they went 500 miles. But nevertheless, when they get there, instead of being muon neutrinos, they're now a quantum mixture. They're simultaneously muon neutrinos and other kinds of neutrinos. Then we have a detector in Minnesota. This is a part of a 15,000-ton neutrino detector called NOVA in northern Minnesota, which then tries to measure these neutrinos, and most of them just go right through even a 15,000-ton detector. But a few of them get measured, and most of the ones we measure are still, when we measure them, they're still muon neutrinos, but some of them are not. Some of them are the other kind, let's say the electron neutrino. And so this is an elementary particle which, just by letting it go for a long distance, changes into a different elementary particle. So this is pretty important. If the elementary particles you were made of did that, if they just spontaneously started changing into other elementary particles, you would be in big trouble. And so this is a very fundamental and important thing that we need to understand about the universe, and we're going to understand it by studying neutrinos. So how do we do that? The experiment I just showed you is a pretty impressive experiment, but it's not the ultimate neutrino experiment, and this is the ultimate neutrino experiment. So now we're shifting to the future, but it's the very near future. It'll be by the mid-2020s, parts of this will be coming online. So this involves a new experiment called Dune, the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment. So this will be the actual neutrino experiment. As I said, for that, we'll need a new neutrino beam. This is going to have to shoot neutrinos 800 miles to South Dakota. And then in South Dakota, we are going to have, in what used to be the Home State Gold Mine, a mile underground, a bunch of new, much more powerful neutrino detectors that will detect the properties of those neutrinos. And then last but not least, in order to make the neutrino beam, we actually need a better particle accelerator at Fermilab, and that's called PIP2, which is, this is a wonder of technology all by itself using fancy superconducting technology. So these three things together are going to make the ultimate neutrino experiment, and we're going to figure out, we hope from this, what is the real role of the neutrino in the universe. We think it has a very important primary role for our existence, for example, and we're hoping to figure that out from this experiment. So none of that without Leon. The other thing that Leon would appreciate is that in order to do the ultimate neutrino experiment, you need a global collaboration. And this is something he understood the value of pulling people together, especially young people from all around the world, in order to do an experiment like this. So the Dune Collaborations is a scientific collaboration it's got more than 1,000 people, 184 institutions around the world, 31 countries at last count. But if you look at this list of countries, you'd see it's an interesting list, who's on there. And this is just a sprinkling of some of the collaborators who are actually already working on neutrino experiments at Fermilab, most of them. And one of the things that Leon recognized back in the 1980s is that if you want experiments to succeed, you had better attract the smartest people, and the smartest people all around the world. So for example, he was involved in a big initiative to get Latin America involved in experiments at Fermilab because there are really smart, talented people in Latin America, and we need them. So that's one revolution that Leon was involved in, the revolution that led to neutrino physics. A second revolution that he was involved in was the one that Nigel already mentioned about the connection between inner space and outer space. So this began with Leon Lederman, with Dave Schramm, who was University of Chicago, another visionary physicist, and Michael Churner and Rocky Call, both of who are here tonight. And you will hear from Rocky and maybe a few words from Michael, who will also be around afterwards if you want to talk to him. So here's a picture of Michael and Rocky. I think they were about 14 when this picture was taken. But this conference, the Inner Space, Outer Space Conference, this was really the beginning of a revolution of understanding that if you want to understand particle physics, you had better use the information out there in the cosmos, and that if you want to understand the cosmos, you better understand particle physics. And this all goes back to the Big Bang. The cosmos comes from the Big Bang, which was a very high energy event. High energy particle physics is what made it whatever it was. So that's the basic connection. And now we see the remnants of the Big Bang out there in the universe. So if you have good telescopes, you can go out and look at that and deduce things about particle physics. So it's a simple idea, but it really was a revolutionary idea, and it's taken a long time to sort of bring it to maturity. And I think Leon would be very happy with the more mature phase that we've reached now, and the future, the present and the near future of what we're doing. So for example, we are just completing something called the Dark Energy Survey. This was an idea originated at Fermilab. It's a big collaboration that did this. It involved making a giant digital camera that we put in a telescope in Chile, and it observed something like 500 million galaxies. So here's a typical photo. You see a bunch of white dots here. Those are not stars. Maybe a couple of them are stars. Almost all of those are galaxies. So it's a big universe out there, and you learn a lot if you're able to measure that big universe. Another thing we'd like to do, I mentioned that dark matter exists. We have lots of evidence for that by looking out at the universe. But we'd like to detect dark matter if it's particles in the laboratory. So how do you do that? Well, it's pretty hard to figure out how to detect something if you don't know what it is. So you have to make some guesses, and then you have to use some technology that you think is sensitive enough to detect those particles. So here's 3 examples of experiments that Fermilab is involved in using 3 different kinds of technologies, and we're hoping that at least one of those has the sensitivity to actually detect dark matter in the laboratory, which of course would be another revolution. And then last but not least, we are involved also with other local institutions like the University of Chicago and Argonne with an experiment at the South Pole called the South Pole Telescope. It's not an optical telescope, it's a microwave telescope, and it's looking at something called the cosmic microwave background, which is, again, an echo from the Big Bang that tells you a lot about cosmology and the Big Bang itself. So this is a group of, I think they're mostly at least Fermilab scientists. I think Sasha Rollin is in this photo. Can you confirm that you're in this photo? No. You're not in that photo? Okay. But you have been to the South Pole? Okay. So if you want to know what it's like to be at the South Pole, you can ask Sasha. It's one of the things that we're working on that we're excited about. All right, I can't really do justice to all of Leon's achievements, but I wanted to have at least one more slide on things he did besides neutrinos. As Nigel already mentioned, he discovered the bottom quark. This is also worthy of a Nobel Prize. I don't think anybody would dispute that. The Swedish Academy doesn't like to give second Nobel Prizes to people. They have done it a couple of times, but they don't like to do that. So he got, I wouldn't say cheated, but maybe didn't quite get what he deserved there. He maybe did get what he deserved by being director of Fermilab for 10 years. That's a really tough job, and he was doing it when we were building the Tevatron accelerator, and that was a really big challenge that he led us through. And he also invented the lightsaber. I'm not quite sure about this one. We're still checking the facts on that. Okay. So now I just want to end with a couple of quotes from Leon that I think really describe where he was at and why he's a continuing source of inspiration to all of us. So here's one of them. The doing of science as well as supporting of science is an expression of faith in the future. And he knew that, whatever it was that we were doing now, if you weren't also spending at least as much time thinking about the future and who you were going to pull in to help you realize that future, you weren't going to have a future. And so he was all about the future and pulling in young people and inspiring young people and getting them to take things to the next steps. So I think that is a lesson I learned personally from interacting with Leon, and I think everyone around him understood that lesson. And then the second thing I wanted to mention, this quote was so poetic that I sort of tried to lay it out like a poem. So let me recite it like a poem. The human search for the structure of the universe, how it came to be, and hence how we came to be, is more important than finding the answer, because the search motivates the creative power of the human imagination. So think about that. That's a pretty powerful statement. And I think that's, again, something that those of us that knew Leon, it was a source of inspiration that it wasn't just the science. We did the science for fun, but the broader impacts of the science and the connections between the science and other things that are important for society, things like art. So we have an art gallery at Fermilab to make that connection stronger. Those connections are just as important as the science that we're doing. Okay, that's all I have, so thank you. So I am now going to hand things over to our very professional master of ceremonies, Michael Churner, who is your senior advisor. Is that your new title?
I advise seniors.
He's senior advisor to the Kavli Foundation, and we decided in the green room that he is tied with Rocky as the world's most distinguished cosmologist. So.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to remember all of Leon's achievements. And when they first invited me to come, I said, well, this must be a 5-day event. Because Leon was a trailblazer in science, as we've heard, and also in science education and public outreach. Leon was a great teacher at Columbia and then later at the University of Chicago. You saw pictures of him with students. He was just an absolute natural and loved explaining things and investing, as he said, in the future. When he came to Fermilab as the director, he had a lot to do. But he was always looking for more to do, and he thought, well, the lab should be involved in science education and in public outreach. And so we heard, and probably we'll hear a little bit more about Saturday morning physics. We'll hear about the Science Education Center at Fermilab. And of course, he was supported 100% in all of this by the Department of Energy. Actually, I'm looking at Al Schriesheim in the front row. He was resisted along the entire way, saying, Leon, you can't do that. And he thought it was important and did it. And then the Department of Energy caught up with him 30 or 40 years later and then honored him for all the things he did that they told him that he couldn't do. I think I got all the words there right. I remember Leon brought both Rocky, I'm about to introduce you, Rocky, and then you'll have a few minutes left for your talk. I remember Leon bringing us to Fermilab and Leon taking me aside, every 6 months or so. So he told me that, Illinois needs a math science academy. And I'm going to get this done. And I thought, well, that's really good, Leon. You've got a lab to run. You've got all your Saturday morning fellow. 2 years later, there was a Math Science Academy, and we'll see the fruits of that labor. So I'm now going to introduce Rocky Cobb, who's going to tell us about some of Leon's achievements in science education and public outreach. So Rocky is the Arthur Holly Compton Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, and he's the director of the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics. Leon brought Rocky to Fermilab in 1983, and we worked together on getting astrophysics going at Fermilab. Among his honors are he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science. He was awarded the Oersted Medal by the American Association of Physics Teachers, and I believe it is correct that he has given a public lecture on every continent on this planet and in some other solar systems. So Rocky, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Michael came here from sunny Southern California just for this event, and I think it's wonderful that he did so. It's just an indication of the respect and love we all have for Leon. So I'm going to talk about Leon's broader impact, not the science that he did, but his impact on science. And I'll mention several aspects of this part of Leon's life. I'll mention the aspect of being a teacher-educator. I don't think Leon really differentiated between being a teacher and being an educator. He had a very big impact as a public speaker, as a science writer, as a science and science education advocate. He championed physicists having public involvement. And I think most importantly, and I'll close with this, he was a role model to many generations of scientists. And this image was shown during before the event. And I like this image because it says a couple of things about Leon. First of all, Leon was director of Fermilab when this picture was taken. Now, things are different now being director of Fermilab than it was when Leon was director of Fermilab. Now, I'm told it's so easy now to be director of Fermilab that Nigel comes in for about he's not here. You see, he left. He comes in the morning for about a half hour, checks in, and then goes and plays golf the rest of the day. That's the life of a director now. But in the 1980s, it was tough being director of Fermilab. But still, Leon took the time to welcome children into his office and talk to them. It also says something else about Leon. Leon could command any stage. He could command attention of any audience. I don't know how many of you have attempted to have 10 preschool children pay attention to you, but it looks to me that he has their rapt attention. You can imagine how difficult that was. And this image also reminds me of Leon's sense of humor. Now, it's not so obvious in the image, but Leon and I used to tease each other because he's an experimentalist and I'm a theorist. And experimentalists are jealous of theorists because theorists are smarter. So I used to say, you just use screwdrivers and wrenches and things like that. And I am, at a higher plane, I use chalk. So I said, Leon, what are you as an experimentalist doing with a piece of chalk in your hand? Shouldn't it be a wrench or a hammer or something? And he said, that's not a piece of chalk, that's a cigarette. Somebody has to teach these children which end of the cigarette to light. So let me say a few words about Leon as a teacher and educator, and first talk about his role in formal education. Now, for many years, he was a university professor at Columbia University, which people tell me is somewhere in the city of New York. And later, after his time as director of Fermilab, he was a professor at the University of Chicago, and then for a long time a professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Particularly at Columbia in the 50s and 60s, he was a pioneer in teaching something that he called a course, Physics for Poets. It was physics for non-science majors. Now, the phrase physics for poets, Leon did not invent, but great artists don't borrow, they steal. And everyone now identifies physics for poets with Leon. And I've met many students, not physics students, not science students, who were students at Columbia, and they have vivid memories of Leon's lectures, and I think they could be described as performance art. I'm not sure the students learned any physics, but they really enjoyed the lectures, and it had a big impact on many people. Leon also, as part of his job as a university professor, trained many generations of graduate students. And he talked about training graduate students in his Nobel lectures, and his Nobel Prize lecture, and I'd like to read a quote from that. He said, I've had 50 PhD students, 14 are professors of physics, 1 is a university president, and the rest, with few exceptions, are physicists at national labs or industry. None, to my knowledge, is in jail, at least at that time. And he also talked about giving graduate students a good experience as working for the PhD. Now it's really easy to be a graduate student in physics. It's very easy now, but it used to be really rigorous and tough. And so there's another quote that Leon has about how he treated his graduate students. Writing about himself in the third person, he said he started counting pions in 1951, and he reached 4,722,938. 2 of his graduate students hung themselves, and 1 was committed. In addition to graduate students who are not in jail, he also had many postdoctoral fellows and really trained generations of physicists who are leading the world today. So he had a big role in formal education as a university professor. He also had a role in formal education while he was at Fermilab, and this involved the founding of the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. And Walter Massey, I don't know if Walter's here tonight, he was also involved in this. And this was about a 4-year effort of Leon to start a residential high school for talented students, high school students in Illinois for mathematics and science. And this is an image of Leon. I believe this is in Governor Thompson's office. Stephanie Marshall, who is right there, is here, she might say. This is Governor Thompson, one of our governors who has never been to prison. That's something to be proud of. Leon, and I believe this was a member of the Board of Trustees of IMSA. So Leon was one of the founders of the Illinois Math Science Academy, but he didn't just start this academy and walk away. He was so involved from its founding until 2012 when he left Illinois. He remained engaged. He was the resident scholar at IMSA, and he started something called the Great Minds Program, and Leon would call on his friends and colleagues from throughout the world to visit IMSA and lecture there. And visiting IMSA is a wonderful thing of itself, but it was really inspiring to see how Leon enjoyed interacting with high school students. And the high school students really benefited and interacted from the interactions with Leon. Now, there's also informal education that Leon played a big role in. And I'll just mention a couple of the things that he did. He started a program known as Saturday Morning Physics at Fermilab for high school students in the Chicagoland area. This was a very popular program, and this ran 3 cycles, and a cycle was a 10-week program where on 10 Saturdays, high school students who didn't have anything better to do on Saturday morning would come to Fermilab and hear lectures and talks by Fermilab physicists, and then go on tours of Fermilab. And many of us here, Leon enlisted to lecture in Saturday morning physics, but he didn't just set it up and say, okay, you 10 people who work for me, you go lecture there. He was involved in it. He showed up not only for his own talk, he always spoke to the students, but for other talks also. He was really involved. And, you know, there's hundreds and thousands of students were impacted by this. Now, Michael mentioned that Leon in the 1980s, when he was director of Fermilab, wanted to do education, science education. And the Department of Energy said, no, you're not allowed to do science education. They looked at some chart in Washington and said, we have a Department of Education. We're a Department of Energy. You have to do something for science. So they actually, at the time when Leon started it, really opposed what Leon was doing. Leon said they threatened to fire me because I was educating people. So to run these programs took money. And Leon started the Friends of Fermilab, which was a nonprofit organization to support science education efforts at Fermilab. And, you know, again, it was a really incredible time where the Department of Energy would monitor if we would use a copy machine at Fermilab that was government property to do something in education. It was a terrible thing to do. Since that time, they've embraced education, and they've really changed. But Leon was a pioneer in leading this. He pushed the Department of Energy to do that. And he started at Fermilab, the Fermilab Education Office, and enlisted 2 people at Fermilab, Marge Bardeen and Stanka Jovanovic, to lead this effort in the Fermilab Education Office. And they concentrated on middle school students. So we've seen Leon having an impact on preschoolers, high school students, university students, middle school students. He was evangelical about science. And this is an image of the Lederman Science Center at Fermilab, a beautiful building. And the Department of Energy, this was the first building at a national laboratory that the Department of Energy allowed to be named after a living person. Leon told me he had to agree to one day die. Leon had an enormous role as a public speaker. He gave many, many public lectures around the world. And I know several people here, I know Michael did it, I did it, and Joe did it, went with him, and we would give public lectures. And he was just amazing and an inspiration to watch. His passion for science that he could communicate to the public. He was also a public spokesperson of science, and he appeared on many television and radio programs. I'll just mention a couple: Charlie Rose Show, Phil Donahue, and if you're sitting next to someone in high school, tell them who those people were. He regularly appeared on Chicago Tonight, the Milt Rosenberg Show. You know, he had a real presence and was a spokesperson for science. And in terms of a public speaker and public involvement, he played a large role in starting C2ST. And in C2ST, he was a street corner physicist, asked a Nobel laureate, set up C2ST, set up a little booth outside of the Wrigley building, I believe, and they had a line of people to, it was stump the chump, try to ask a question to a Nobel laureate that they couldn't answer. He did this in Chicago and New York, and he would do things like this. He was public outreach was important to him. He also played a role as a science writer. With David Schramm, who Mike mentioned and Joe mentioned, he wrote a book From Quarks to the Cosmos in the early days of particle physics and cosmology. The book that he's most well known for is a book called The God Particle, and it was about the Higgs boson and other things, but actually it was about Leon. It's really a great book to read, and he wrote this with Dick Tracy. And he wrote a series of books with Chris Hill, who's a theorist at Fermilab, Symmetry Beyond the God Particle, and Quantum Physics for Poets. All of these books are wonderful, and everyone should read them. He was an advocate for science and science education. He involved in so many things, I can only mention some of them. He was very involved with the idea of teaching high school science by modeling, rather than the teacher giving a lecture and working problems. You would get the students together to do an experiment and then model what they did and try to understand it. He was an advocate for physics first, teaching physics first. He claimed that now in most high schools, science is taught biology, chemistry, and physics because that's the alphabetical order. But it doesn't make sense that physics underlies so much that you should teach physics first. In Chicago, he was involved in the starting of the Teachers Academy for Mathematics and Science in the Chicago public schools. And if you want to know why are Chicago public schools today so excellent and perfect, part of the reason was Leon's effort in the Teachers Academy for Mathematics and Science. He was president of the American the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He was involved, as I said, with C2ST, and he wrote many op-ed pieces for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago local papers, international papers. He wasn't an enemy of the people, but he did have a lot of pieces in the newspaper. And in terms of his advocacy, he also had public involvement. He was co-chair of the board of sponsors of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and he was responsible for moving forward the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. It's his fault that the clock moves forward. So let me end with something that I think is perhaps Leon's greatest impact, and that he was a role model. Now, he did education and outreach on many levels: university, high school, middle school, elementary school, preschool, even to politicians. And when I came to Fermilab in the 1980s, when I was 14 years old, at that time, it wasn't so accepted that physicists should have a role in teaching non-science majors, et cetera. The attitude in the bad old days was that, if you're a physicist, you should be teaching 5 graduate students, the highest level, and, you shouldn't waste your time teaching non-science majors. But Leon was a role model, a great physicist, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who told us, not only told us, but by his actions showed us, it's okay to teach non-science majors. It's okay to present public lectures. It's okay to write books for the public. It's okay to be involved with outreach. And one of the things that I really enjoyed, it's okay to have a personality. His personality came through in everything that he did. And I don't know of anyone who had the impact that Leon did as a role model for science education and science outreach, and accomplished what he did at so many levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocky, for capturing that small fraction of what Leon did. So we're now moving on to the next segment, which is a physics slam. So I'm just going to ask, how many of you know what a physics slam is? Oh, a fair number of people. I didn't know what a physics slam was. So I was on the airplane today, and I asked the person next to me, what's a physics slam? And they said, well, you should look on the internet. And I said, what's the internet? And the person was very polite. They showed me how to use the internet. So it's really, really great. So it is teams of scientists trying to explain a complicated idea in an entertaining way, and then the audience gets to vote on who did best. And this is something, Fermilab was one of the first adapters of the Physics Slam. They're on number 8 this year. I think it's November 19th. I think it's probably, if you go to StubHub, I think you can get a ticket. But it's a very popular event. And so I'm going to introduce the two people who are going to lead the Physics Slam. The first is Dr. Adrian Coleman, who's the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at IMSA. And Dr. Coleman's specialty is strategies for increasing diversity in STEM, and boy, do we need that. And among her many honors is a 2016 Trailblazer in Education Award from the NAACP. And I thought I would personalize it just a little. She's smiling at me here. She doesn't want me to go to the next one. She has played golf with Tiger Woods. And I asked her, did he have to cheat to beat you? And, well, I'll let her tell you that later. So I'll welcome you out. And then I have one other person. Oh, are you both going to come at the same time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, let me introduce you, Peter. Okay, so we're trying to find Adrian or a substitute. So the second person who's going to lead this slam is Dr. Peter Dong, who's a science teacher at IMSA. He got his undergraduate degrees at Harvard and his PhD at UCLA. And I was doing a little research on him, and he's a very interesting character. So he was in Quincy House. How many people know Quincy House at Harvard? Yeah, so it's one of the famous houses at Harvard. And his bachelor's thesis, and they let you do stuff like this at Harvard. I mean, you couldn't do this you'd have to do a real work at the University of Chicago. But his bachelor's thesis was, he wrote a musical called Les Fizz. And Les Fizz, I mean, it's going to start, it's probably up for an Academy Award this year. It's a musical about Howard Georgi teaching Physics 16 at Harvard. And so that's Peter Dong. So Peter and Adrian, come on out and do the slam.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2019 Physics Slam, featuring students from the Illinois Math and Science Academy and our great scientists from Fermilab. As stated earlier, Leon was one of the founders of the Illinois Math and Science Academy. He would be so proud of his legacy today. We are the #1 public school here in the state of Illinois, and we are the #2 public school in the nation. You all should, yeah. I think he would also be proud that our students are really focused on solving the world's problems. We've adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we're focused on equity and excellence. Today we have with us our founding president, Dr. Marshall. Where are you? I saw you here. Then we have our current president, Dr. Torres, and say hi, Dr. Torres, and 2 of our cabinet members, Dr. Hernandez and Dr. Robinson. So please give a shout out to IMSA. If Leon were here today, he would tell our students to have fun, relax, and enjoy what it is that you're doing. So during this Physics Slam, we're gonna have some fun, our students are gonna relax, And, well, it's going to get a little competitive, but they're going to have fun. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dong.
Okay. So to get started tonight, do you understand how you're going to vote for the winners? It's not by a ballot. You're going to vote with a decibel meter. So we have a decibel meter on an iPad, and at the end of the time, you're going to applaud for each of our competitors tonight, and the one with the loudest applause is going to win the tournament. So it's very, very important that you be involved and that you pay attention to what's going on tonight. So my name is Dr. Peter Dong. I am privileged to be here. I'm here to introduce the competitors tonight. That's because I've worked at Fermilab and I've worked at IMSA, and so I have some knowledge of the people here tonight. So without any further ado, let's get started. Are you ready to get started? Yeah, okay. Okay, that's decent volume, but you got to do more when you're actually voting for people. So our first pair tonight, students at the place called the Math and Science Academy, you don't usually think of them as like, you have a certain image in your mind. But actually, I want to try to give you the idea that our students actually do a lot of things that are more than just math and science. So our first student presenter tonight is someone who does do math and science. He's studied modern physics and planetary science and does research on exoplanets right now. But in addition, does a lot of other things. Plays a lot of basketball. He actually flies planes. Apparently they let kids do that these days. And he plans to go to, wants to actually go to the military to fly helicopters, or maybe to build them, whichever works. And so we figured that someone like that should be paired with the scientist who's really an expert at operating dangerous pieces of machinery. So we found a scientist who, when she was in college, she was an operator of a nuclear reactor. And then, after that, she graduated and went on to something even more impressive, which is operating the, at the time, highest energy particle accelerator in the world, the Fermilab Tevatron. And so she is someone who really understands how to deal with large and very dangerous pieces of equipment. So the two of them are going to present to us tonight about how these dangerous pieces of equipment can work for us and how they can also help us to be operated safely. So without further ado, please welcome the dynamic duo, Fermilab scientist Cindy Zhou and IMSA student Aaron Calhoun.
Testing.
Hello. It's going critical. This is really happening. For the first time, we have a fission controlled by mankind.
We couldn't have done this without you, Enrico Fermi.
To me, this is the beginning of a new era, a source of limitless energy. And we've beaten Hitler's scientists to discovery. I know we have. But let's not let this go on for too much longer. Quick, scram the reactor. Of course. Thank God, we didn't want that to happen.
Hi, everyone. Well, you're probably wondering, what just happened here? Oh, hi, everyone. Well, you're probably wondering,
Sorry.
What just happened here, other than the mic? Well, to start off with, this was one of the greatest greatest scientific advancements in American history. It was also a turning point in World War II. And finally, the Chicago Pile 1, as the name suggests, happened right here in the great city of Chicago.
Here in Chicago, indeed. You see, not only do we have the opportunity to have Fermilab here in Illinois, but we also have the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants like Enrico Fermi. You see, it was his work at the University of Chicago that led to the first man-controlled fission experiment. But I've never worked at a nuclear reactor, but my partner here has. So why don't you tell us what that's about?
Sure. The way that the nuclear fission process works is like this. Every atom has a certain number of neutrons and protons inside its nucleus. packed inside its nucleus. Sometimes if the ratio of protons and neutrons is off, that atom's going to end up being radioactive. But Aaron, what's radioactive?
Well, it just means that the nucleus of the atom is unstable, energy-wise. Like, if you were to pick your foot up, you would be pretty unstable too. And just like you're going to want to put that foot back down, the nucleus of the atom is going to want to release energy to come back to a stable state. This released energy is what's known as radiation. And in some cases, the nucleus of the atom is so large and the energy released is so great that it breaks the atom into multiple pieces. This is what's known as fission.
In the fission process, whenever the uranium nucleus breaks up, sometimes extra neutrons get released. Those hit other neutrons, or those hit other nuclei, causing them to fission, which causes other nuclei to be released, and on until you've got a pretty good chain reaction going. So you can imagine a huge amount of energy coming out of just a small number of nuclei. That's the power of fission.
But how do we control such a powerful experiment? Well, we do this by using control rods. They're basically pieces of mass that suck up the extra neutrons and allow us to control the experiment, just like we did in our Chicago Pile 1 when she released the control rods into the pile. It sucked up the extra neutrons and allowed us to control it in the event of an emergency.
To help you visualize this process, we have turned you, the audience, into a nuclear reactor. I hope you're okay with that. So remember, we're on a timer, so please pay attention and work fast.
So now, we ask that you, the audience, pretend for just a moment that you are all uranium atoms. So we ask that if anybody around you, somebody at diagonal or to the side, starts to fission, we ask that you fission as well. And she will explain what that is.
The way that we're going to simulate this is by having you stand up, start clapping your hands, and making a lot of noise. So I want you all to get up, practice, and all together. Go for it.
We can do this.
Woo!
There we go.
All right.
Thank you.
That was great. Okay, we can stop. You can sit down now. That was really great. So we haven't quite reached the end of our presentation yet, but we really appreciate the applause. All right, so remember, you are a nucleus. So whenever you see anyone around you start fissioning, you're going to get hit by neutrons, and you're going to fission as well, like this.
Of course, yes.
And so you're going to have to pay attention, stay aware of your surroundings, and keep clapping until we stop you.
But before we do that, I want to let you know that we have some control rods. When these control rods tap on your shoulders, we would like you to stop clapping and sit down, just like this. Thank you, yes, of course. But the way that this is going to work is it's going to happen a row at a time. So when the person at the end of your row gets tapped on the shoulder, we ask that that whole row sits down and stops clapping, okay? Our control rods are here in the front.
So you're going to have to, if this all works out just right, then we will simulate a controlled nuclear reaction, a chain reaction, and then insert our control rods and then slow and then stop the reaction. All right, are you guys ready to go? Woo!
Of course, thank you.
Okay, let's get started. Come on. Stand up. You got this. All right. All right, now, let's enter our control rods. That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being such a great nuclear reactor, and please give yourselves one more round of applause. So Aaron, what is the future of fission?
Well, to me, it is one of the most viable sources of energy for our future. According to the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's not only the safest form of energy, but it's also the greenest form of energy. It releases 4 times less carbon dioxide than that of solar, and releases 400 times material waste than that of solar as well. But with this in mind, where do we go from here? Well, we have many solutions, but today we're going to talk about thorium. Now, thorium is more common in the Earth's crust, it doesn't release radon gas during production, and does not require enrichment.
Another thing is that thorium is more stable in the event of a meltdown, and thorium reactors components are harder to make weapons out of. According to my fellow physicist, Carlo Rubbia, 1 ton of thorium can create as much energy as 200 tons of uranium or 3.5 million tons of coal. Or, as the London Telegraph put it, a mere fistful could light London for a week.
So now with the little time that we have remaining, we ask that, as before, you become a fission reactor. You don't have to stand up, but we do ask that you become a thorium reactor rather than a uranium reactor. So whistle, clap, be as loud as possible, because we want to win this contest. Thank you. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Okay. Our next presenters, with our next student presenter is one of those students who is really just good at too many things for her own good. She does, of course, study science, but she does a lot of other things as well. She's a writer. She has a rather sardonic wit, actually. In fact, one of my favorite things she did was she rewrote the Nicene Creed in terms of my modern physics class, which was really quite great. The last line was, "and the resurrection of our grades to come." It was great. She also does a lot of other things, though. She does swimming, she does fencing. She apparently takes bamboo garden stakes and turns them into longbows. And of course, she also studies a lot of things, computer science, physics, and she's right now doing research at Fermilab, working on searches for quark-lepton compositeness and large extra dimensions. So with all the different things she does, we figure she's ready to take on real difficult challenges. We paired her with a scientist who's very good at taking on difficult challenges. This scientist is so good at what she does that they actually named her experiment after her. That's not actually true, I don't think, but it could really be just a coincidence that she has the same name as her experiment. She works on neutrinos, which are some of the most, as you've heard, some of the most mysterious and hard to understand things on the Earth, and she does her work 300 feet underground down in the bedrock of Illinois. In addition, she works at Fermilab as a Wilson Fellow. If you don't know what that is, for a particle physicist, that's something like getting accepted into Harvard. It's actually harder because no one gave me a Wilson Fellowship. So she is certainly ready for difficult challenges. We figured they'd be a great pair tonight. So please welcome our next pair of presenters, 2 rising stars in the constellation of physics, Fermilab scientist Minerva Betancourt and IMSA student Grace Yu.
Hello. Hello. Modern Physics Worksheet 6, Question 2. You have a $5 billion budget to build a particle detector. I don't know anything about particle detectors, and I'm not sure if my teacher never taught us about them or if I just fell asleep during the lecture.
Oh my God, Grace, our detector broke last night. So I got a call from India this morning from our collaborators, the detector. So I spent all day working on it. So I found there was a board that was broken. So here it is.
Did your detector cost $5 billion to make?
No, but the particles in the accelerator flew over all the place.
What? Are they dangerous? Are they radioactive? Are we all going to die?
No, calm down, Grace. These are just neutrinos.
Oh, okay. If it's just neutrinos, then those are just the really tiny neutral particles that don't do anything, so it's fine.
They do things, but we will talk about those later.
So I have a confession to make. The last time I did anything related to particle physics was over a week ago, so I really need to start simple. The most basic element of particle physics is a particle. But what exactly is that? So simply put, a particle is a piece of matter. So the classic example of a particle would be an atom. They make up everyone and everything. More importantly, though, a fundamental particle is a particle that's so small that it can't be divided into smaller units. So an atom is a particle, but it's not a fundamental particle, since it can be divided into protons, neutrons, and electrons. So these are neutrinos, the particles we'll be talking about today. They're not to be confused with neutrons. So like neutrons, neutrinos don't have a charge, but unlike neutrons, neutrinos are fundamental particles, which makes them really important to our understanding of physics. Also, the little v written on the neutrino particles isn't a v, it's the Greek letter nu, because neutrinos. So that saying, it's all Greek to me, is especially fitting for physicists. So this is the standard model of particle physics. It basically shows all of the fundamental particles that we've discovered so far.
So we have 6 quarks, we have 3 neutrinos, we have the electron neutrino, mu neutrino, and tau neutrino. And just to give you an example, the protons that Grace referred are made of 3 quarks, 2 up quark and 1 down quark. And for neutrinos, it's 1 up quark and 2 down quark.
Hey, what does an atomic duck say?
Grace.
Quark, quark, quark.
Grace, move on.
Right. So as of December 1930, we knew that protons and electrons existed, so a positively charged particle and a negatively charged particle. So based on that, this guy named Wolfgang Pauli said that there might also be a particle that had no charge. He called it a neutrino, and he said that it had no charge, but he also said that it was so small that nobody could actually find the thing.
Okay, so Grace, where do neutrinos come from?
Why don't we ask the audience?
Okay, where do neutrinos come from?
Just shout it out.
Bananas. Okay, good. That's good. That's a good source. Another source? Very good. So we have a gift for you later. So we.
So yeah, we're not promoting the roasting of newts here, but the neutrino imagery is helpful for remembering where neutrinos come from. Okay. So this is Leon Lederman, the guy who founded my high school. He's been well introduced by now. But in 1962, he and Schwartz and Steinberger invented the neutrino beam method of studying neutrinos in the lab, and he received the Nobel Prize for that. So we're going to show you how the neutrino beam method actually works. So you start with a bunch of protons moving at very high speeds, and you aim all of them at a graphite target. And once they hit that target, they will decay into pions. Because pions are charged particles, we're able to use a magnetic horn to control where they go. And once they pass through that horn, they will decay into neutrinos.
Okay, very good, Grace. So we have learned that neutrinos come from the sun. We also can make them in the lab. So maybe the next question is, how do we detect them? So just to give you an example, these are experiments that we have at Fermilab. So this is one of the experiments that is called Minerva, that is made of carbon. Nova is also made of carbon. And then we have a new experiment that is called Microboom, that is made of a new technology that we are going to use in the future, that is made of liquid argon. So why don't we show how these detectors work?
Okay.
So this is a piece of the Minerva experiment.
We call this a plastic scintillator, and inside of it, there are these tiny green fibers that are able to detect when particles pass through them. So for this demo, we can use photons, or light particles. So you can see particles pass through, and then if this scintillator were part of a working detector, then these fibers would be able to send signals that they found particles here and at this time. I got it.
Okay, but why we care, Grace?
So the goal of all of these experiments is to discover the basic properties of neutrinos, such as their mass and how they're able to change flavor. For example, an electron neutrino can basically spontaneously change into a muon neutrino. They can change between types, and we don't know why or how that happens.
So basically, studying neutrinos, we can answer why the universe is almost all matter and no antimatter. So how do we make these measurements? So we have a near detector that is near the source, and a far detector that is Minnesota, for example, and then we study neutrinos. So this is an example of the Nobel experiment that is compared with the size of an airplane, just to give you an idea of the size of these neutrino experiments. So why don't we show an example? So I have a ball here that has two colors. So the orange is the neutrinos that I make at Fermilab, is the muon neutrino, and then I'm gonna send these neutrinos to Grace. She's in Minnesota, and then if this turns to green, then she's gonna get electron neutrinos. Okay? This doesn't happen often, so this is a real challenge that we have here. So, okay, she didn't get anyone. Let's try another time. Yeah, she got it.
So in the future, Fermilab plans to build a huge detector called Dune with the goal of answering all of our questions about neutrinos. For a size reference, just one of the 4 liquid argon tanks in the Dune detector is 60 meters long, and the building we are in right now is 65 meters wide. So take twice the length of this building, and that is how long the Dune detector is going to be. Dune is the largest science experiment ever to occur on US soil, and scientists from all around the world are involved, as you can see on that map. And there will be one detector built at Fermilab and one in South Dakota.
Okay. Thanks to Leon Lederman, we have the best neutrino program in the world at Chicago. And thanks to all his outreach effort, we are basically training the next generation of scientists.
And also thanks to him, my high school exists.
And finally, our third competitors for tonight, our third presenters. Tonight, the third presenters are we actually have 2 IMSA students, because one of them is a current IMSA student, one of them is an IMSA graduate. The current student, we have a theme, a lot of the people do sports. He apparently does golf. He says that he started golf when he was age 3. So I have a 3-year-old at home, and I don't think this is physically possible. But he's been doing it for a very long time. In fact, the team just won our conference championships. But in addition to that, he does a lot of other things, such as he plays guitar in a band. But he also does a lot of work with physics, a lot of work with astronomy, computers, things like that. But he's actually kind of a quieter person. You might not be able to tell that tonight. But he likes some time by himself. And we thought it'd be good to pair him by someone who's really an expert with being by herself, because she works in literally the most remote place in the entire world, which is the driest, windiest, and most desolate desert in the world, the South Pole. I think it's kind of difficult to come up with something to trump working with a nuclear reactor or working in an underground cave 300 feet down, but working at the South Pole might do it. So to tell you all about it, let's welcome our final presenters for the evening, Fermilab scientist Sasha Rowland and IMSA student Tyler Patak.
Hey, is this the shuttle to Willie Field? I'm heading down to the South Pole today if the weather holds up.
Oh, yeah, you're in the right place. I'm Shuttle Sasha, and this is Ivan the Terrabus. Hop on.
Great. It's 10 degrees outside, but I'm roasting in this coat.
I feel ya. I never wear my big red when I'm on the shuttle bus, driving back and forth. What are you heading to the South Pole for anyway?
I'm an astrophysicist, actually. I'm headed down to the South Pole to work on the South Pole telescope.
No way. Okay, this might sound a little weird, but I have been a huge fan of astrophysics ever since I saw Leon Lederman give a lecture about the Big Bang when I was in high school. Can I just ask you a bunch of questions?
Yeah, sure, fire away.
All right, I'm gonna start pretty basic. Why would you put a telescope at the South Pole? It's the coldest, driest desert on Earth, and it's so far from anything else.
Well, the SPT was designed to look at the cosmic microwave background, the remnant radiation left over from the beginning of the universe. And in particular, the SPT is most sensitive to light at the microwave end of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Microwave? Like microwave ovens?
Yeah, actually. So your microwave oven works by emitting microwave light, which interacts with the water particles in your food. And believe it or not, the same process actually goes on in the atmosphere. So the fact that Antarctica is so cold and dry means that the telescope is basically transparent to the atmosphere.
Wow, okay, so radiation from the early universe, how did it form? It must have had something to do with the Big Bang, right?
Uh-huh. So the universe was created 13.7 billion years ago in a blaze of light and rapid expansion.
How rapid are we talking here?
Well, in the first 10 trillionth of a second, the universe went from the size of a particle to 10 trillion times that size, at a rate faster than the speed of light.
Wow, that must have released a huge amount of energy.
Mm-hmm. At this point, the universe was so unbelievably hot and dense that atoms couldn't even form, leaving behind a soup of protons, neutrons, electrons, and high-energy photons, which just railed around space, colliding with one another. And about hundreds of thousands of years later, the universe expanded and cooled enough that protons and electrons could combine to form neutral atoms. And this allowed photons to be able to travel freely through the universe, which set loose the initial light from the Big Bang into the universe, which is what we see now as the cosmic microwave background.
Okay, so these are photons that were released from this big soup that was cooling in the early universe. I guess you can kind of think of it like the universe taking a really big selfie, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy.
Sweet. Okay, so what did the cosmic microwave background look like?
Well, if we were around 13 billion years ago, it would look like a spectacular glow from every direction. Although over the past 13 billion years, as the universe expanded and cooled, the wavelength of this light expanded as well in a process known as cosmological redshift. So the high-energy light that was emitted 13 billion years ago has now stretched and expanded into millimeter-long microwave light.
Okay. I think I've seen a picture of this at some point. There was a space telescope that imaged the whole sky, and the image in every direction looks kind of like a big splotchy pattern, hot spots and cold spots. What's that all about?
Yeah, the Planck telescope actually mapped out the entire sky about a decade ago. But the image it made was kind of blurry. Down at the SPT, we have a bigger telescope, so we can resolve these features much better.
Oh yeah, I've seen the primary mirror on the SPT. It's like 10 meters wide. Can't put that in space. Okay, so what do we learn from those hot spots and cold spots? There's got to be a pattern there, right?
Yeah, we can study the statistics of the spots in the CMB and learn things like what the universe is made of. And it turns out that only about 5% of the total energy in the universe comes from what you and I and this old bus are made out of. And we also learn things like how old the universe is and how quickly it's expanding.
Wow, I had no idea you could learn all that from just a single image. All right, so if you already know how the universe works, what is there left to learn?
Well, there's a couple things that we don't have a great handle on right now, and one of which is gravity and how it behaved in the very beginning. So we know that the Big Bang was a huge event at energy scales much larger than those we can produce in big particle colliders.
Like the Tevatron at Fermilab.
Yeah, actually. So we see these distortions in the CMB, which look like really faint swirly patterns, and we think they might be the imprint that a huge gravitational event left behind.
Okay, so you're telling me that if we look at the picture of the cosmic microwave background today, what we might be able to see in that is the imprint of a gravitational event that happened 13 billion years ago?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So everything is affected by gravity, even light. And we can see this as the CMB traveled past stars and galaxies as the universe was forming.
Okay. What is that effect called? Gravitational lensing, I think, right?
Gravitational lensing, exactly.
Yeah, that reminds me. So one last question before we get to our destination. I saw an article in the news recently about a group of scientists that imaged a black hole. And I guess that black hole is so massive that the light, any light around it gets lensed into it and collapses in. So what you're left with in this image is just a donut pattern. Is that Am I kind of explaining that correctly to you?
Yeah. What you're seeing in the image is the very edge of a black hole, known as the event horizon. The event horizon. And it's kind of funny that you bring that up because the SPT was one of the telescopes that helped make that image.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Remember when I told you that the bigger the telescope, the better the resolution we can make?
Yeah.
Well, what if I told you that scientists found a way to create a telescope the size of the entire Earth?
No way.
Yeah way. The Event Horizon Telescope is a consortium of instruments all around the Earth, including sites like the South Pole. And they use really precise timing to synchronize their instruments to create a sort of virtual telescope, which has enough power to see the writing of a quarter sitting on the moon.
Wow, that is a really powerful telescope. I guess that black hole must be really, really far away then.
Mm-hmm. Try 50 million light years away, and 6 billion times more massive than our sun.
That's pretty big. Okay, I have so many more questions, but if you guys remember, we've been sitting on a bus this whole time, and we've arrived at our destination, Williams Field. Your plane is waiting. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Have a great season.
Yeah, you too. Have a good flight. Thanks, everybody.
They were phenomenal. Give them another round of applause. But now it's time for the competition. And remember, the winner is determined by how loud the audience is. So our first pair, we have Cindy Jo and Aaron Calhoun. Please step up so they know who you are. All right. All right, in our second pair, we have Minerva Benkart and Grace Yu. Please step up. All right, in our final pair, we have Sasha Rollin and Tyler Patak. All right, now they're all winners in my book, but the official winners for this evening are Sasha Rollin and Tyler Patak. Thank you all for participating in the 2019 Physics Slam.
Okay, I think that got everybody's energy level up for the final event. And the final event involves you, so it's going to be the Ask a Scientist panel. And the panel is going to be led by Dr. Sasha Prokuda. She's the Director of Programs and Engagement at C2ST. She has a PhD in evolutionary biology from UC Riverside and a bachelor's degree in biology from Penn State. But the most interesting thing about Sasha is for 6 months, and that's the question I want to ask her. Why was it only 6 months? She was a bear technician. And do you know what a bear technician does? So she was an expert on capturing black bears. Now, this job only lasted for 6 months, but you'll tell us why. Okay, so she's going to lead the Ask a Scientist panel, and I guess my question to her is already about the bears, so you think about questions about science for her, for the panel.
Hi, everyone. It's going to be really hard following that great energy there, but we'll try. We'll fail, but we'll try. So we have a great panel lined up for Ask a Physicist. As you're listening to the research that they do, log on to c2st.cnf.io, and you can ask questions online. We'll also take live audience questions. We'll have a Mary over there with a microphone running around, so just flag her down. Okay, first up, I'm going to reintroduce Mike. You've already heard about him. Mike Churner is a theoretical cosmologist who coined the term dark energy in 1998. He is the Bruce V. and Diana M. Ronner Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago and was formerly the Assistant Director for Mathematical and Physical Sciences for the U.S. National Science Foundation from 2003 to 2006. Welcome back, Mike. We also have Dr. Jessica Esquivel. She is a recent PhD graduate in physics and is currently working as a postdoctoral research associate at Fermilab. We have Dr. Kirsty Duffy, and she's a physicist and Lederman Fellow at Fermilab. And last up is Dr. Don Lincoln. He is a senior scientist doing research at Fermilab National Accelerator and is an adjunct professor of physics at the University of Notre Dame. Okay, we are going to start off by you guys explaining what you do, because I think you can do it way better than I can. So go ahead, we'll start with you, Don.
So I do my research using the Large Hadron Collider. What we do is recreate the conditions of the early universe, 1/10 of a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang. And so that's mostly what I do. I also spend a significant amount of time writing books for the public about science, so hopefully I'll be able to answer questions that you have.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, okay. I study neutrinos, which you've all been bored to death already about tonight, so I won't bore you too much other than to repeat that they are some of the fundamental particles that make up the universe, arguably, these guys are going to argue with me, the most exciting ones, because they do this really crazy thing where they change from one type to another, and because maybe they explain why the universe exists.
I studied neutrinos in graduate school. I also think they're super exciting. I use machine learning, which is the same sort of software that Facebook uses for facial recognition. So that was pretty much my grad work. I am now working on the muon G-2 experiment, so I jumped ship, which was really, really scary. But it's also a lot of fun to, do new physics and start a new challenge. And I'm also very interested in outreach, diversity, inclusion work, and recently have been named the AAAS If-Then Ambassador. So if you want to ask about what that is, I have answers to that too.
I work on small things, how the universe began, how it evolved to where we are today, what dark matter is, what dark energy is, and the ultimate fate of the universe. But then that leaves me some spare time, and as was mentioned earlier, I am a senior advisor at the Kavli Foundation. So I spent 41 years at the University of Chicago, and now I'm advising the Kavli Foundation.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, since this is a Leon Lederman event, how do you think Leon's legacy lives on at Fermilab and at the University of Chicago? Anyone jump in?
Okay, I'll start. One of the things that really struck me about Fermilab was the fact that they really value diversity and inclusion and outreach and community engagement work. And it was one of the things that at a very young age, I saw physics and community outreach as hand in hand. As an undergrad at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, you couldn't be a physics major unless you took a class every semester called Fiesta Physics. And what that was to do hands-on activities and just share the joy and the fun of physics to middle schoolers around the area. So when I came to Fermilab, I felt that sort of just inspiring awe, of sharing what we're actually learning, sharing the cutting edge science that we're doing to the people that are around us. And I attribute that to Lederman's legacy, so yeah.
It's huge at Fermilab. It's funny listening to these talks and people talk about back in the day when it wasn't really the thing to do outreach and to teach people. And I can't think of a single person at Fermilab that isn't involved in outreach and talking to young people and older people. We have tour groups coming in. We have Saturday morning physics where we have people who give up their Saturdays every week for 10 weeks, 3 times a year, both to teach and to come in. I don't think I would have done that as a teenager. And it's a great thing for us as well because it's nice often to step back and do these sorts of things and remind yourself why you study these things and talk about questions like, why do you study neutrinos? Why are they interesting? How do they affect my life? Rather than, why doesn't my code work? And why don't I understand that graph that someone showed me?
Well, his impact, of course, is significant in the science. I mean, without him, the Tevatron wouldn't exist, and that was Fermilab's scientific program for 25 or 30 years. But on the outreach side, he certainly inspired me, and first by writing his book, The God Particle, which I found inspirational and interesting. But even indirectly, he also hired Rocky Cobb, who is a gifted public speaker and was inspiration to me when I was a much younger student. Of course, he's much older than I am. But the two of them showed that it was okay to do excellent science and to explain it. And that really was a fundamental motivator for why I started writing books and doing the things that I do, because they showed that it was okay.
So I think Leon inspired all of us to think big. So Leon always thought big. No one mentioned, he invented Fermilab. He wrote a paper called the Truly National Laboratory, and so Fermilab was his idea. The idea of IMSA, IMSA is successful, had many fathers, but I remember Leon saying that, we're going to create a math science academy, and, we're going to do it from scratch, and it's going to happen very quickly, and he never thought small. One summer he called me up and he asked me what I was doing, and I was at the Aspen Center for Physics, and I said, I'm trying to figure out what dark matter is. And he said, well, let me tell you what I'm doing. I've got some lawyers here, and we're going to put together a lawsuit, and we're going to sue Hollywood for $5 trillion for the misrepresentation of science. And I'm not sure the lawsuit ever came to pass. Wow. You would think you could find a lawyer if they get 1/3 of and he literally, he thought big. He gave scientists permission to have public impact. In terms of talking about the impact on Hollywood, David Salzberg gave us a colloquium at the University of Chicago last spring. Some of you may know he was the science advisor for all 12 years for the Big Bang Theory. And I wish I had had the opportunity to ask Leon, is this what you had in mind? And I know what the answer would be. It's an okay start. We need to do better than that. But he really, in addition to what everyone else said, he taught people to think really big and don't worry about it being impossible. And I come back to IMSA. he told me that, we're going to have this Illinois Math Science Academy. I thought, okay, that's really good, Leon. That's really good. You just keep doing what you do, and some of those dreams come true.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to our first question. I had others, but it's not necessary. We're rolling along. What are the most important skill sets for young graduates looking to contribute to the field of physics?
Mostly determination, I think. I mean, yes, of course, you have to have a certain amount of, training and intellect to do science research. But, there's a lot of truth to the 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. The real trick is to be motivated and interested and determined and to never give up, because most of the things you try will fail, and it's just the nature of working on the frontier of knowledge. There's no roadmap to tell you what to do. You are making the roadmap, and so you're going to make mistakes. But don't let those mistakes discourage you, because then you'll stop. And so I think that's the most important thing, is to just know, put your eyes in the distance, know where you want to go, and keep on walking.
That's great.
Yeah, Oh yeah, okay. I think that's a really good point, because I think the biggest difference between school and becoming a researcher is that in school and also in university, you're doing questions that your teacher has set you that have an answer, and you just, especially maths and science, you do it until you get the answer right. And you always, it kind of ingrains in you this sense that like there is an answer and I just have to work out how to get to it. And then suddenly you come into this world where maybe there's an answer, no one's gonna know when it's right or not. And you have to be, there's a lot of determination, there's also a lot of bravery to be able to come in and say, I've done this thing and I actually don't know if it's right or not, but help me kick the tires and try and prove that it's wrong, and if we can't, then maybe it's right.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what they said. One of the things I really like to say is to be okay with failure, which Don hit on, and it's something, honestly, that I'm still working on. But it's the basis of the scientific method, right? You come up with a hypothesis, you test it, and sometimes it's wrong, and you move on. And that moving on is the hard part, right? Realizing that you failed, that you were wrong. That's what we as physicists do, on a regular basis. And to not internalize that and not think that there's something wrong with you because right at the onset you didn't come up with the right hypotheses, right? And just be okay with you not always knowing what's coming next.
And ruling out a hypothesis is also part of the journey.
That's all of the graphs pretty much that you see are just, we ruled out this section. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think somebody must have mentioned curiosity. Did I hear that? So curiosity, passion. My definition of passion is that you think what you're doing, the mystery you're trying to unravel is the most important thing in the universe at that moment. And then the last one I would add, and I sort of heard it, was humility. That it turns out the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And we heard it in making mistakes. Making mistakes in science is really important. And you can look pretty silly sometimes. Do people remember the experiment where neutrinos went faster than the speed of light? And they made a mistake, but they reported their results. They tried as hard as they could to figure out what went wrong. And that in science is really important. It's just to say, this is what I found. Science is self-correcting. If I'm wrong, someone will figure it out. But that humility, because we're out there, the fog at the boundaries of discovery, it's very foggy out there, and you don't know which way to go. And you said the answer is not in the back of the book. And the teacher who poses the question doesn't always know the answer.
And I'd like to say one thing about that neutrino experiment. About the faster than light, they thought they found that it was faster than light. They reported it. They asked for help. People looked at it. Nobody found a mistake. They found a mistake. They reported that it was a mistake. They were honest that they screwed up, and it was okay as long as the goal is to look at the data and come to a conclusion that you can justify and is real. It's really, really important. It's one of the things about science that's so important is people are critical from the outside, but it's self-critical, and they were the ones that came up with the right answer.
If I could just add to that, I'm sorry.
Keep it rolling.
The self-correcting is an important feature of science that I think Leon would want the public to understand, is making mistakes is okay. Science is not authority-based, it's evidence-based. And so if you make a mistake, it will get corrected. Even if there is people doing something intentionally wrong, fraud, it gets corrected. And that's one of the beauties of science, because the more outrageous the claim you make about, oh, I can do this or that, people are going to go check it because they want to extend it. And so that self-correcting nature of science, the evidence-based, you're only as good as your last experiment. It doesn't matter if Leon told you something is right. He would say, don't believe me, go out and do the experiment.
All right, we'll turn to the audience. Does anyone have a question? All right.
Thank you. In your opinion, could you share some of the most exciting unanswered questions in physics?
Is that directed to a specific person?
Well, I just brainstorm. Each of you can get your own opinion. Like, where should the next scientists start focusing on? Because a lot of stuff is being discovered. What is going to be the next big thing or the next exciting questions that have yet to be answered?
I'm totally biased because I am now working on the muon G-2 experiment, which when I joined, I didn't think it was that interesting because we were making a very precise measurement. Think just a whole bunch of decimal places to an already made or already done experiment in the 80s. And I was like, what's the big deal? But it is actually really exciting. So what we're doing is looking at muons dance, right? Muons dance in a magnetic field, and we have a really big magnet. And what happens in a vacuum is that virtual particles, ghost particles, pop in and out of existence. And theorists have a pretty good idea of which of these particles should be popping in and out. But the more precise the measurement you make, the more weird physics you get to see. So it's a really good way to probe the unknown without having to go to such high energies. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think one of the things a lot of people are excited about is what we call beyond the standard model physics. Joe, at the beginning this evening, he showed us a little picture, and we saw it later in the physics slam as well, and he said, these are the particles, and there's, 3 by 4, and that's kind of part of what we call the standard model of particle physics, which is these are the particles that exist, and they make up everything, and there's a whole load of theories that go along with it, and we often put it up on slides like that and say it like it's true, and like, these are the particles, that's what exists, now we're studying them. But one of the reasons I'm excited about neutrinos is that neutrinos don't fit in that theory. They've already got some features, like the theory says that neutrinos are completely massless, and we know that that's not true. They have mass. It's very tiny. We've never been able to measure it, but it's there. And that's exciting because it proves that our best theory of what's going on in the universe is wrong. And we don't know how, and we don't know why. So a lot of the experiments that we're doing right now are just kind of trying to throw everything against the wall and test it and see if we can find out where it's wrong. And the other thing about that is I think it can often feel like physics is done. Back in the 60s, they didn't know about the muon neutrino, but now we do. What are we going to find next? And that's not true because the standard model we know is broken, so we know we don't know everything and there's new stuff to find. We just need to work out what it is.
I'd actually like to think a little bit bigger than this because the idea of particle physics and cosmology, the goal is really quite arrogant. It is to understand everything, to understand how the universe came into existence, the rules that govern the universe. Does the universe have to be the way it is? Could it be different? I mean, these are what one might call philosophically existential questions. And that is sort of the goal, the deep long-term goal of particle physics. So there's a lot of things that we do know. We know the standard model. We know about a thing called general relativity, which governs the cosmos. But there's an incredible amount that we don't know. For instance, the matter that makes up you and me, the reason I can't put my hand through this table, this matter is about 5% of the matter and energy of the universe. 95% of the universe we don't know. Something like 25% of it is a thing called dark matter, we think, and 70% of it is a thing called dark energy, which causes the universe to expand faster and faster. 95% we don't understand, so that's a real biggie. Another thing is, you heard E equals mc squared, which says that matter can turn into energy and energy can turn into matter. But it's really true that energy can turn into a thing called matter and antimatter. Antimatter sounds like science fiction, but it's fact. And according to every measurement we have made, that matter and antimatter should be made in equal quantities. So now you go back to the beginning of the universe when it was younger and hotter. In the Big Bang, the universe was at very high temperatures. That energy that was there should have made matter and antimatter in equal quantities. Yet you look around at us, you look at the solar system, the galaxy, the entire cosmos, all you see is matter. So where did the antimatter go? This is an enormous question that the neutrino experiments at Fermilab are trying to get their head around. So these are two really big things. Another question is the Big Bang. What banged and why? And was there a before? What will the end of the universe be? We sort of think we might know that. So these are some of the really big questions. There are more, of course, and if we had time, we could go through a bunch of them. But the thing is that we really are thinking big. We are, as Michael said, as Leon suggested, think big. Think about nothing other than answering all questions. And that's going to keep us in work for quite a while.
Well, I thought I was going to top Don with big questions. I'll try. Where did space and time come from? And why is there something rather than nothing? But then I think part of the question was, what is a big question that we may answer soon? And nobody's touched upon it, life elsewhere in the universe. And I'm happy to bet with anyone that in the next 20 years we will find evidence of life somewhere else in the universe. And that is a really, I didn't say intelligent life because we haven't found that on Earth yet, but I think that's amazing. The question, are we alone? And what are the implications and the Fermi paradox? We'll talk about the Fermi paradox at dinner, but how many people have heard of the Fermi paradox? Yeah, so that's sort of an amazing question.
Okay, I'm going to read you this next question, and now I'm going to throw a curveball at you. We need to answer everything in 30 seconds or less. Okay?
Impossible.
Who's enforcing that?
Me. I have the whip. Are there other candidates for dark matter other than neutrinos?
There are a lot of candidates. That's not the problem. Is not are there other candidates? There are many candidates. So the trick is to figuring out an experimental way to determine between them. So yes, there are many, many possible candidates. Theorists are very, very clever. They have a new idea every day.
Very well done. All right.
Just add, neutrinos are some of the dark matter, but they're not the bulk of it. They're just the spice.
Great. Do we have an audience question?
Any idea what Leon would tell us to do about climate change? Not a physics question, but...
Any idea what Leon would say that we should do about climate change?
Fix it.
We're doing better than 30 seconds now. This is great. So what is the fate of the universe? Will it collapse in a crunch, expand endlessly, or something else?
Oh, that one's easy. We don't know. And that's the best thing about science, are all the things we don't know. And the answer to that one hinges upon what dark energy is, and we don't know what dark energy is. So that's a wide open question, and I hope someone at IMSA or someone, it's going to be the next generation that figures that out. But that's a big, wide open question.
Okay, what are your best bets, just real quick?
Well, Michael's the expert, but the fact is, if dark energy is what we think it is, the expansion of the universe will continue to get faster and faster until what will happen is that distant galaxies that we can now see, we will eventually not see. All we see is a handful of galaxies that are near that are near the Milky Way, and eventually, and this is sad, the stars will go out one by one, and it will be a dark and cold death to the universe.
Beautiful. It just warms my heart.
I wanted a cheery ending.
All right. Yep.
With all this new information, I keep thinking, will we soon be able to time travel and with our bodies travel in time to the past?
We can already do that. The telescope is a time machine. So the more powerful telescope we have, the further back we can look in time.
I mean, as a human being in a human body.
Oh, you want to actually travel back? Well, you're going to have to invent that one yourself. But isn't it pretty cool that when you look at a powerful telescope, you can, with optical light, the farthest back that we can see right now is to within about 500 million years of the Big Bang, when the universe was about a tenth of its present size. That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
But the IMSA kids should get cracking on this, is what I'm saying.
What is your favorite flavor of neutrino and why?
Muon neutrino. That's literally 5 years of my life.
I would say electron antineutrino for the same reason.
We have an audience question.
The last two presenters on the stage were talking about the Big Bang and how initially all this matter accelerated faster than the speed of light. As far as we know today, light is the fastest speed in the universe. But again, it's what we know today.
So that's a simple one. You're not going to like the answer, though, but it is a simple answer. So in Einstein's theory, the limit that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, that's the speed with which you can move through space. But the Big Bang was not an explosion of things into space, it was an explosion of space itself. So in Einstein's theory, there's no limit on how fast space can expand. And so the expansion of the universe is a cosmic land boom. It's space getting bigger. And everything gets carried along, including photons. And now to really make sure you don't have a follow-up question and to give you a headache, so in the expanding universe, light travels faster than the speed of light if you take into account that it's being dragged along by the expansion of space.
And this isn't just in the past, this is in the now. Distant galaxies are traveling away from us at nearly the speed of light, and because the expansion of space is getting faster and faster, those objects will eventually travel away from us faster than light. And it's because the expansion of space is not governed by this. It's traveling through space is the only thing that's governed by it.
What are some disadvantages of using thorium in a nuclear reactor?
I don't know.
Ask Cindy.
Mic down.
Anyone? Anyone?
It's supposed to be safer, but I'm not an expert.
All right. Yep. Yeah.
Hey, this is for Jessica, but whoever else as well. How's machine learning being integrated into fundamental physics when it's like curve fitting, right? So how can it complement kind of theory and experimental measurement?
Yeah, so the way I used it was actually to train a neural network or a computer to recognize different particles in specifically my detector, liquid argon detector. So just like when you, I know, I don't know why I'm pointing up there, but just like when you're on Facebook and you start, uploading photos and all of a sudden it says you want to tag people and it always puts the box around people's faces, right? That's a network that has been trained on faces, recognizing eyes, recognizing noses, recognizing mouths. But then after you start uploading and tagging yourself, all of a sudden you start seeing, oh, do you want to tag yourself? And the box around your face has already been labeled as me or you. So I did the same thing. I fed in a whole bunch of different particles as images. Really, they're just lines and kinks, right? But as a particle physicist, you learn to recognize lines and kinks as muon neutrinos or stuff that I don't really care about. So you train the network on a whole bunch of different images, and then you throw an image or an event that it's never seen before and hope to God that it works. And 5 years later, it worked. So really, that's pretty much the future of analyses when it comes to liquid argon neutrino detectors. I wasn't the only one that was using machine learning, and we're using it in all kinds of ways. It helps graduate students' eyes because we're not looking at thousands and thousands of images anymore. We can have a computer do it for us. So,
yeah, actually, fun fact, back in the day when they had some of the first particle physics detectors, they literally would take a photo of it, print it out, and have someone with a ruler measure things and then say, this was a muon, and it had this much energy. And now we can replace it with computers because what we get out of our detectors is essentially still pictures. But we can also use it in other ways where we can tell it, we can use machine learning algorithms where we tell them more information than just the picture. We can tell them things like the energy that something deposits, and we can tell them things like, I'm looking for a neutrino interaction, and I know that a neutrino interaction looks like this, and I know that not a neutrino interaction looks like this. And they can, if you train them right, they can pick up on things that you don't even know that you're putting in. And so they can get much more subtle distinctions between things that we might not be able to pick up if we just tried to write it out ourselves to start with.
Okay, we're almost out of time. We're just gonna try and squeeze in 2 more questions from the audience. What is space?
What was the question? What is space? What is fake?
Space.
Oh, what is space? I'll take that one. We don't know. But it's a great, it illustrates asking questions is really important. So Newton was asked that, and he said, go away. They're just where things happen. It's the arena. Einstein came along, and he didn't answer the question, but he made one step, which we've already talked about this evening, which is space and time are dynamical. Space can stretch, time can warp. And one of the questions that string theorists are hoping to answer is, what are space and time? And the answer that they're giving, and don't expect to understand it, I don't understand it, is that they're emergent phenomenon, that they are not fundamental, that there was, I can't even say there was a time, that space and time emerged at some point. They're not fundamental. So it's asking big questions, asking questions in science and getting confused, asking the wrong question. That happens 90% of the time, but the most important thing is to ask a question. That's a great question.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to remind you to fill out the survey that is, it's up there. And there's $100, somebody's going to get a $100 prize? Or am I getting that?
15.
Sorry?
15.
I don't know. Alan said he was going to match the 50 and it was going to be 100. And I just want to, one thing Leon was lovable. And I remember when Leon won the Nobel Prize, he was not the first person in Chicago to win the Nobel Prize. But I remember reading the Chicago Tribune, and every Nobel Prize that involves Chicago, we're proud of it. But Chicago was happy for Leon. This is someone that Chicago, he wasn't born here. He was at Columbia longer than he was here. Chicago really loved Leon, and they rejoiced when he got the Nobel Prize. And I hope people go away a little bit tonight, some of the stories and some of the impact why Chicago and why the world loved Leon. He had impact. He cared about people. He was approachable. Thank you all for coming.